Well, welcome back. I'm delighted to be able to be with you. I know this is a different time than our normal kickoff, but that is indeed the time we were in. In 2006, my oldest son, the day before exams, was diagnosed with leukemia. And during that treatment time early on, we went to Children's Hospital, and I remember being there one day for clinic, and the staff psychologist met with us while Lee was getting treatment, and he shared with us a story from Winnie the Pooh. Now, I must tell you, as someone who had spent nearly 25 years at that time guiding people through crisis and loss and grief, I was a little taken back. And second, I thought, does he not realize that my son is 18 years old and not 8 years old? But I kind of indulged him and listened. And quite frankly, when he was done, I realized how impactful the story was and that there were some takeaways from that story. And I wanted to share that story with you. It's from the second chapter of Winnie the Pooh, and it's when Pooh goes visiting and gets into a tight place. Now, in the interest of time, I can't read the whole story, so I'll read some highlights. To set this up, Pooh was doing what Pooh does, very linear thinking. He was going through the woods. He saw a hole. He knew hole meant rabbit. He knew rabbit meant friends, and therefore friends meant food. So he had found Rabbit's home, and he came visiting, and he called out to Rabbit, and ultimately Rabbit let him in, and that's where we pick up the story. So Pooh pushed and pushed and pushed his way through the hole, and at last he got in. "You are quite right," said Rabbit, looking at him all over. "It is you. Glad to see you." "Well, who did you think I was?" said Pooh. "Well, I wasn't sure." And then they went on to talk about possibly having something to eat. Pooh always liked a little something at 11 o'clock in the morning, and he's very glad to see Rabbit getting out the plates and mugs. And when Rabbit said, "Honey or condensed milk with your bread?" he was so excited, he said, "Both." And then, so as not to seem greedy, he added, "But don't bother about the bread, please." And for a long time, they said nothing. And they ate and they ate and they ate until it was over, and it was time for Pooh to leave. So he started to climb out of the hole. He pulled with his front paws and pushed with his back paws, and in a little while his nose was out in the open again, and then his ears, and then his front paws, and then his shoulders, and then, "Oh, help," said Pooh. "I'd better go back." "Oh, bother," said Pooh. "I shall have to go on." "I can't do either," said Pooh. "Oh, help and bother." Now, by this time, Rabbit wanted to go for a walk. And finding the front door full, he went out by the back door, and he came around to Pooh and looked at him. "Are you stuck?" he asked. "No," said Pooh carelessly, "just resting, thinking, and humming to myself." Then they begin to talk about how they got there. And Pooh says, "It all comes," said Pooh crossly, "out of having front doors not big enough." A Rabbit responded, "It all comes," said Rabbit, "of eating too much." "I thought at that time," said Rabbit, "only I didn't say anything." "Well, I shall go get Christopher Robin." "I was just beginning to think," said Bear, sniffing slightly, "that Rabbit might never be able to use his front door again." "So should I," said Rabbit. "Use the front door again?" And Christopher Robin said, "Of course he'll use the front door again." "Good," said Rabbit. And so they began to talk about their predicament and realized that Pooh was stuck and would just have to wait. So Christopher Robin says to them, "Then there's only one thing to be done," he said. "We will have to wait for you to get thin again." "How long does that take?" asked Pooh. "About a week, I should think." "But I can't stay here for a week." "You can stay here all right, silly old bear. It's getting you out that's difficult." "We'll read to you," said Rabbit cheerfully. And I hope it won't snow, he added. And I said, old fellow, you're taking up a good deal of room in my house. Do you mind if I use your back legs as a towel horse? Because, they're doing nothing, and it'd be very convenient just to hang the towels. A week, said Pooh gloomingly. What about meals? I'm afraid no meals, said Christopher Robin, because getting thin quicker. But we'll read to you. Bear began to sigh, and he found he couldn't because he was too tightly stuck, and a tear rolled down his eyes, and he said, then would you read a sustaining book? So for a week, Christopher Robin read the sort of book at the north end of Pooh, and the rabbit hung his wash at the south end, and in between, Bear felt himself getting slenderer and slenderer, and at the end of the week, Christopher Robin said, now! So he took hold of Pooh's front paws, and Rabbit took hold of Christopher Robin, and all of Rabbit's friends and relations took hold of Rabbit, and they all pulled together. And for a long time, Pooh said, oh, and ow. And then all of a sudden, he said, pop, just as a cork coming out of a bottle. Christopher Robin and Rabbit and all Rabbit's friends and relations went head over heels backwards, and on the top of them came Winnie the Pooh, free. So with a nod of thanks to his friends, he went on his walk through the forest, humming proudly to himself. But Christopher Robin looked after him lovingly and said to himself, silly old bear. Now you might be asking, what does that have to do with back to school? And I want to offer a few takeaways. First, we always find ourselves in tight spots, sometimes of our own creation. This was a tight spot that Winnie the Pooh created for himself. Sometimes we find our tight spots and we had nothing to do with them. Rabbit was in a tight spot, but he really didn't have anything to do with it, but he found himself in the tight spot. They didn't spend a whole lot of time focusing on why they were in a tight spot, a little bit of back and forth. And so that's a takeaway for us, to not focus on the why, but to focus on the how. How do we get out of the tight spot? And when they realized they were in the tight spot and they really didn't have the means to get out by themselves, they brought in help. They called for Christopher Robin. And he came and helped, and Rabbit did some practical things, and Christopher Robin did some very personal things by just being with Pooh. So not focusing on why, but how we get out. And then I think the other takeaway for us during this time is do what you can. Rabbit, he knew what to do. He would use part of Pooh to hang his laundry, and he'd be present with Pooh, but he'd still continue to work. Christopher Robin read to him for a week, sat with him for a week, encouraged him for a week. Do what you can. And then finally, I think the final takeaway is getting out of a tight spot takes many hands. Christopher Robin and Rabbit had to call for help as well. All of Rabbit's relations and friends, and it took all of them pulling on Pooh for him to pop out of Rabbit's hole. So do what you can, and it takes many hands. I know we're in a tight spot. I know it's a tight spot that we didn't want, we didn't create, but it is the condition that we find ourselves in. So as we start back to school, I want you to know that we as a board of trustees are going to stand with you. Whether it's work that needs to be done, whether it's a support that needs to be given by simply being present, your board is ready to work alongside of you. I hope you'll focus on what we can do in the midst of this changed time. You know your impact, and your impact is great. You understand that lives are changed by your presence, and I want to thank you for being flexible, for being committed, and following the calling of your life and the passion of your heart. We're in a tight spot. We're not going to focus on why. We're going to focus on how we can get out. We're going to do what we can. We realize it takes many hands, and at the end of the day, every decision will be driven by what's best for our students and then our faculty and our staff. I hope you have a great year, and I look forward to the many celebrations of this school year. Thank you.